In an interview with the BBC in 2012, Vice President of Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie Munger, explained his and Warren Buffett's very simple approach to investing. So before I start, I'll let you hear it from him first.
We have to deal in things that we're capable of understanding. And then once we're over that filter, we have to have a business with some intrinsic characteristics that give it a durable competitive advantage. And then, of course, we would vastly prefer a management in place with a lot of integrity and talent. And finally, no matter how wonderful it is, it's not worth an infinite price. So we have to have a price that makes sense and gives a margin of safety considering the natural vicissitudes of life. That's a very simple set of ideas.
So as you've just heard, the 4 principles that he's just explained seem extremely simple. You've got to be capable of understanding the business. It's got to be a business that has a intrinsic characteristic that allows it to have a durable competitive advantage. Management in place with a lot of integrity and talent. And finally, you can't pay an infinite price. So you need to find a price that is suitable and allow for a margin of safety within that value. On the surface, this is an extremely simple concept. And don't get me wrong, Charlie is completely right when he says that it is extremely simple and it is the main concept of value investing. However, when you go to apply this in the real world, it isn't quite as black and white as you'd probably think it would be. So this is why maybe I'm going to go through it briefly now, each step that he said, to give you a rough sort of concept of what each one is and how to actually look for these when you're going around, you're investing, and how you could find a company that has these characteristics. However, I think it doesn't do enough justice to have one video that covers all 4 because it's such a broad topic and I could literally go on for hours and hours about it. I'll make 4 more separate videos that cover each topic individually in a little bit more detail, so it's a bit easier for you to relate to and actually get the information from, and you can relate that to your own investing. You've got to be capable of understanding the business. So a key concept that Warren Buffett has always spoken about when talking about this topic is circle of competence. And if you imagine it as there's thousands of companies in the stock market, you can't and you're not expected to know all of them companies and all the industries within them companies. It's just physically not possible. So there's certain companies that you will understand and that you are a consumer of potentially, or you have something that is an advantage over other people because you might work in that industry, you might have hobbies in that industry. So i.e. I don't know, you might find a leisure company and you go to their theme parks or something like that, where you've got an advantage over other people that are potentially within the stock market because you've either Phil Town has called this like the 3 circles, and it's like think of it like a Venn diagram. So he normally talks, it's about whether you work in it, you've got hobbies in it, or you're a customer. So for example, most people are customers of Amazon, so most people can quite quickly grasp the business concept of Amazon, and they're the sort of companies that you want to be looking for. Try and not understand everything, because if you try and understand everything, you'll end up investing in the companies that you think you understand, and then you'll come later on in the line and things will crop up, events that you wouldn't have seen. But if you'd actually knew more about the industry or that company, then you may have actually seen them coming up and you wouldn't have made a poor investment. So first of all, start off by listing all the companies that you interact with daily or that you think you have quite a good knowledge of already, and then try and work off them. So the next point that Charlie Munger spoke about was finding a company with an intrinsic characteristic that creates a durable competitive advantage. I think one of the easiest examples of this is Coca-Cola. So everyone knows Coca-Cola, but when you think about how strong their moat is, if you think of going to get Coke, if you went to the supermarket, you would automatically, most people buy a bottle of Coca-Cola, the branded bottle, rather than like the home brand Coke. And you think about in pretty much every shop in the world, they've got you can get Coke from pretty much any shop, and Coca-Cola holds the most amount of shelves within that shop usually. So you think how strong their brand moat is. Someone could come in quite easily tomorrow and make a Coke that tastes better, but it would never be as popular as Coca-Cola because the brand is so strong, and that's a prime example of a branding moat that has been built up over hundreds of years. Warren Buffett made an investment in Coca-Cola, and still to this day he calls it one of his best ever investments. And do you think that Coca-Cola will be going away in like 100 years? Because the only things that could really threaten it are like the health benefits of it, and how it's not really that healthy for you. But they are coming out with a lot of new lines like Coke Zero and Diet Coke that obviously appeal to that customer. So it's sometimes quite hard to actually identify a moat, and a lot of the time it's best if you can't identify what the moat is that for that company, what gives it an intrinsic characteristic that gives it a durable competitive advantage, then it probably doesn't have one. But sometimes it can be quite easy to quickly identify whether they may have one by looking at it quantitatively, looking at the numbers. So a lot of the times, companies that have high return on invested capital, so the amount of money that they invest in their company, they get a high return off that, and the high return on equity. These are two figures that if they are consistently high, over 10% usually or more, but that depends on industry, over 10 years or more, then that is a good sign of that the company could have a competitive advantage. So some key examples of competitive advantages that you might come across that are probably the most common ones are brand moat. So the example of that is like Coca-Cola, and then you've got like toll bridge moats, which are a little bit like a lot of railroads have these. So they have fixed, obviously, railroads that go through the country, and these rail lines aren't going to go anywhere anytime soon. And a lot of the time, new companies can't come in and compete with them because to build a railroad takes considerable planning permission, time, money, and a lot of the time they just won't get this. So a lot of the time they have a toll bridge because only customers can only use their railway lines. The next example is a switching moat, and a good example for that is Adobe. So a lot of people get trained up to use Adobe software, and then a lot of companies don't want to retrain their staff on a new software because that takes a lot of time, and it's a high cost. So even though another company might come out with better software than Adobe, people won't end up changing to the better software because it costs too much money, and it takes too much time to take all the employees out that are working on projects already to then retrain them in a new software. And then the final key example of a moat is a network effect. So there is more than this, plenty more, but these are sort of the main ones that you might see now. And so a network effect, you can think of this like Facebook. So it's almost like a flywheel effect. So because Facebook's got so many people on their apps, such as like Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, people automatically come to these apps more because their friends and family are already on the apps to communicate. If an app started up, a social media app, and it's got no one on it, people won't go on it because there won't be any content on it. Like YouTube as well. YouTube is like a network effect because everyone always posts videos on YouTube. That brings more creators onto YouTube to create more content, and because the viewers know that's where all the content is, they will keep coming back to it. So that's a prime example as well of a network effect. So the next point was management that's in place with talent and integrity. This is a slightly more subjective and a harder assessment because a lot of the time, unless you're a big corporation or a big hedge fund or something, you're not going to actually get proper contact with the management, so it's really hard to judge. But some of the key ones to look at is like if you're looking at numbers, so you can look at their return on invested capital, return on equity. They're really good because that shows you how effective they are at reinvesting their own capital into the company, and a lot of the time that is actually to do with the management themselves. And then you also want to look back at annual reports and different annual meetings to make sure what they're saying they're going to do in the next years. So if you look at 10 years ago, they might say in 5 years we want to do this, this and this, and you go back and you want to look at the 10-year and the 5-year and see if they've actually accomplished what they said they were going to accomplish within that time. That gives you a good example if they actually are capable and they're not lying to investors. And you also want to make sure that they're not like salespeople, because a lot of people that get to these positions get there by being really good salespeople, like CEOs, but you want to make sure they're not just trying to sell you the business, that you make sure they're being honest with you and telling you the issues. But they're just simple ways of telling. But you can go into a lot of detail with management. So finally, we don't want to pay an infinite price for a stock. So we want to pay a price that makes sense, that also involves a margin of safety. So first of all, what is a margin of safety? A margin of safety is simply if you've come out with a value for a stock at, let's say, £100 per share, you would theoretically want to pay a discount to that, i.e. $70, $60, $50 because because if that's your valuation is only an estimate from yourself. So if you think it's £100, but actually unforeseen circumstances happen in 2 years and the company is not as good as you thought it was, then the stock price could obviously reflect that and the value of the company comes down. So if you're paying a discount to that, all it does is act as a safety net for yourself, and also it can add to your returns, because if you did actually work out that it was $100 but you paid 50 for it, then obviously if it was actually worth 100 and it goes up to 200 in the next 5 years, but you've paid 50, you've got 4x instead of a 2x. So it makes a huge difference with that as well. So it protects your downside and actually increases your upside. So that's one of the key concepts of valuation. And then also actually how to work out the intrinsic value, so the value that you think it's actually worth. There's a few different methods, but the key one that most people do is something called a DCF, discounted cash flow model. So effectively what you're doing is you're projecting out into the future, probably over 10 years, the amount of cash each year that you think that company is going to generate for you. So you've got to think of the company as you owning the whole company. Yeah, because a share is a part of a company, but it isn't a piece of paper. You're buying a percentage of the company. So, but if you think of it as you owning the whole company, and you work out into the future how much cash you think it's going to generate for you, and you apply like so if you have how much cash it's producing at the moment, you can project out by having a growth rate to that, how much it's going to produce in the future. But obviously, money now is worth more than money in 10 years because of inflation and the buying power. So £1,000 now or £1,000 in 10 years hasn't got the same buying power. So you need to discount them cash flows from 10 years ago back to present day to see how much it's worth to you now. It sounds complicated, but it's actually quite simple. And so this will then allow you to have a present value for that stock that you think it's worth, because you've worked out how much it's going to return you and how much that is discounted to today, so that you can actually get the adequate rate of return that you want. Now, some things that can actually affect valuation are growth rates, for example. So how much you think the company is going to grow in the future, as well as future plans that management talk about. So if management are saying that they in the future are planning to do a big redevelopment of a plant, or you've got automation on a plant, or they're looking to expand in a new market, then obviously this can affect growth rates, because it theoretically it should increase the amount of money that the company can bring in. So that can affect, and also buybacks as well. So if they're buying back their own shares, obviously you still own the same amount of shares, but the pie's getting smaller. So you can imagine it's like your slice of them shares is increasing. So that obviously increases the share price as well. So obviously this perspective, to me, when I first read about it, just made complete sense, and it seemed like the common sense route to go down. Now, in my opinion, it is. And it is how most people in the world that has outperformed the stock market have done it, doing some sort of variant of this method. And it seems so simple, and it is, but there's a lot more to it. So I think I'll, like I've spoken about before, I'll go into more detail in the next few videos on each aspect of this. So if you like this content, please like and subscribe, and then also put a comment down below telling me what content you would like to see, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye.